Hey guys, welcome to episode 11 of FTC Files. Today we're going to be interviewing Team 7303 and Mukund here. Uh, you want to introduce
Hello,
yourself?
everyone. I'm Akunt. I'm a senior, and I'm one of the captains of FTC Team 7303.
And I'm Sid. I'm new here, but I'm one of the captains of FTC 16461 from Charlotte, North Carolina. And today we're going to really be talking about just taking a dive into Moose season, how it's going, how 7303 is doing, and what their plans are. And then our main topic for this episode is how 7303 functions on a smaller budget. So, how they're able to manage their resources, how they're able to do so well as they have in the past with winning competitions such as MTI and doing so well at NorCal. So let's get right into it. How's your season going so far?
Oh, it's going pretty well. We've qualified to NorCal's. We tried to go to other regions, but it didn't work out in the end. So we're just gonna try to have a good time at NorCal's and see where it goes. Yeah.
So, uh, talk to us a little bit about how your design process works and how you've been able to do well this season and what your thoughts are on where the season's going.
Okay, yeah, so pretty much at the beginning of the season, we come up with a bunch of ideas, as most teams usually like straight off the bat when you receive the challenge, you like have a bunch of ideas on like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that. So we kind of prototype pretty much everything that comes to mind, and we spend a lot of time like just testing out different things. And for the first robot that we ever built, usually it's mostly made out of either kit parts or hand machined custom parts. So that's one thing that we do to reduce cost a lot. We have a bandsaw and a drill press, which are like fairly easy to acquire for most teams. And we use those tools to kind of like easily, cheaply, and quickly prototype our parts, as opposed to some other teams who might be using a CNC or a laser cutter. So yeah.
Yeah. And then as far as like the actual robot goes this season, what have you guys tried to hone in on and as far as your strategy, as far as what you've been trying to do? I know you mentioned that you qualified already, so how did that happen?
Yeah, so basically, we just tried to go full offensive mode, except for our drivetrain. We thought it would be good to do a six-wheel drive this year. Um, it was pretty hard to control, especially considering the fact that we had to fit through the tight gap in between the barriers. Um, so we're probably going to transition away from that for our next design. Uh, instead of a six-wheel drive, we're probably going to do a mechanism drive. And then in terms of the actual scoring capability, we went primarily offensive. So we wanted to be the primary scorer on the field, which kind of entailed going to the high alliance hub. So in practice, we were getting around like 15 to 16 back when we went to the qualifier. But, like when you're at the actual competition, the your performance goes down quite a bit. So we were at around 11 to 12 at the competition, but that was enough to get winning alliance captain.
Yeah, and that's very solid numbers even for now. And then I know you mentioned that you guys are planning to redesign for NorCal Champs. Do you have any teasers you want to share?
Uh, not Probably not at the moment, but I can say one thing. This is probably the best looking robot that has ever come out of this team. So I guess keep your eyes peeled for that. It's not a very high bar, but it's it beats our next best looking robot by a lot.
That's a perfect transition into our main topic. So, we're going to be talking about, as I like to call it, balling on a budget. So, how 78303 is able to succeed with all of their many qualifications, the world success, the MTI success. So, they're clearly able to succeed at such a high level, and how they're able to do it with not as many resources as maybe the richest teams, but using what they have to their full capabilities. So, jumping right into that, you mentioned that this is probably your best looking bot, but I mean, clearly you guys value performance over aesthetics. So, how talk to me
Yeah.
about like how you guys maximize performance without caring about that as much.
All right, yeah. So pretty much, well, on a complete side note, probably the only reason that this robot's the best looking is we have like more direct access to a CNC thanks to a local FRC team, which we didn't have before. But previously, what we used to do when we like CNC'd parts were like at least a week away. And when you're focusing on performance, you really need as much time as possible to keep optimizing your robot. So rather than wait a week for a proper CNC'd part to come, you could make maybe like a marginally less precise piece by hand using just like a bandsaw, some polycarb, or some sheet metal from Home Depot and a drill press, or even a hand drill for that matter. So we did a lot of that, just working like with the two tools that we have as well as 3D printers, uh, to like rapidly prototype, rapidly iterate, and then at the end, maybe like if we're satisfied completely with what our robot is, like all the conceptual aspects of our robot, um, then maybe we would look into getting all of the parts on a robot that were done by hand, maybe done with a CNC. But we very rarely go to that aspect because, like, the robot's never perfect. Like, there's always something that you can make better. And we pretty much just keep striving to do that throughout the entire season. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then that came up with two good questions. So my first one is, as far as last year goes, I know you guys had a lot of success last year, and you had two main bots as far as I'm aware. But so your first one, which was the one that you used primarily in NorCal, was obviously a super successful bot, one of the first to break 500, and just performing so well, so consistently. So talk to me a little bit about that bot and the process that went into keeping that simple and keeping that, because that was a very simple bot, but it was so efficient. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that was the thing where we like really prioritized the parts of the cycle where like we could potentially save the most time. So if you look at our shooter, I'm pretty sure this is true for most team shooters. They can flick three rings fairly consistently, maybe in like around a second and a half. And of course, you see these other teams who are flicking rings very, very quickly. Like maybe they're flicking three rings in like less than 1 second. And that looks really, really cool. And props to teams that can actually get that working consistently. However, like realistically, let's say you're getting maybe 15 cycles per game and you're working for, let's say you're working for a week to reduce your shooting time from 1.5 seconds to 1 second. Really, you're only saving half a second per cycle. At 15 cycles, that's like 7.5 seconds saved through the match. Whereas, let's say you spent that week iterating on your intake, which is like it takes a lot longer to intake than it did to shoot last year, right? So if you spend that week iterating on your intake, you could maybe cut down your intaking time from 5 seconds to 2 seconds or something crazy like that. And then you just like multiply that by 15 and you see obviously that you save a lot more time iterating on your intake than you do on your shooter. So as long as like after we hit that baseline of having a consistent shooter that flicked rings in around 1.5 to 2 seconds, we kind of just like left that there and then focused completely on our intake. And of course, we use the sticks, which I don't think a lot of people had thought of before, and maybe some people got a little bit mad at that. Uh, but yeah, that was definitely useful for stopping the rings and reducing our overall driving distance.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, that was a perfect example of what I wanted to jump into next. So the sticks, the I remembered seeing your MTI bot in person and seeing these little two rev bars hanging off the sides and being like, what is the point of that? What's it gonna do? And then it worked so well to block people. So how do you guys come up with little things like that are really cheap? They're really, but they're super effective and they do exactly what you want them to do.
Yeah, so like I mean, this was actually like a internal like debate that was like raging within our team for like maybe a month or so when we were trying to figure out like what to do, right? So one of our members wanted to just keep the same robot that we had for NorCal's and lift the shooter up so that we could shoot over other teams. And I, of course, wanted to transitioned to the turret because it, it looked cooler and of course it performed better. But the problem with the turret, of course, we could have a very high turret, but that just added complexity with the transfer. So the issue that we were running into was that if we have a low robot, how are we going to not get blocked by other teams, right? So we just kept brainstorming, we kept debating within our team, and then we figured out, okay, we might not necessarily have to like increase our vertical height of the shooter if we can just separate other robots from the shooter horizontally. So that was kind of the base of that. And then after we did that, we kind of just used some metal plates as along with some extrusions just to like function as blockers pretty much. That also, one other thing that it helped with is I don't think a lot of people know this, but the turret is at the back of a robot, and at certain angles, the turret is kind of sticking out of the drivetrain perimeter. So the bumpers really helped uh, make sure that no robots kind of ran into our turret and inevitably broke it. So that was also a useful application of those bumpers.
Yeah, that multifaceted design is awesome. So stuff like that is really something that you should take away from 7303 and the way that they solve problems pretty cheaply. And then as far as that goes, what is some things that you would recommend for teams trying to emulate this approach, such as school teams who may not be able to get as much fundraising, or those who simply just don't have the means to get as much? What would you recommend for them?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of investment that you probably have to make upfront. Our team has been around since, I don't know, 2013, almost 10 years now, so we have a lot of parts lying around that we can just use. However, if you don't want to like do that, the two things that I would say are like must-haves is something to quickly cut metal and something to quickly drill into metal. So you could just use those two things over and over again instead of having a CNC, which might be like in the thousands. You spend a couple $100 at your local Home Depot, buy those machines, and it's definitely going to be worth it in the future when you can just kind of keep on like belting out these parts that uh, other teams might be spending hundreds of dollars on potentially. Another thing that I would definitely recommend is sheet metal because you can cut that very quickly and it tends to be a little bit weak, but as long as you reinforce it properly, it is like pretty much perfect for like m molding your intake kind of because you can just if you want to change your geometry, you don't really have to like recut anything. You just like make a little bend here and there, and that's like almost a completely different intake. If you just keep on doing that every couple minutes, you could just have a different intake to test, which is really, really useful.
Yeah, for sure. And I know one thing you mentioned was that initial upfront gathering of parts over time that you guys have accumulated. So, I know Aperture Science, another super well-renowned team who spends a lot of their time free building, does a similar thing where they just have a ton of parts. So, do you think that's a really good approach for people who are looking to get into this sort of model of operating under a one-time cost and then just slowly sending money? You think that's a good model?
I mean, yeah, definitely, I think so. But the other side of that is if you want to make that initial investment, you need to make it last, right? So if you're going to, let's say you're gonna spend like $1,000 on like a bunch of Go Build a parts that you're gonna use for, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years, you want to have your team around for 5, 6, 7 years so that your investment kind of pays off. So that's where like the sustainability part comes in. Um, but I definitely think the upfront cost might be worth it. And even if it's not worth it for your team, you could use like the bandsaw, drill press, hand drill, like hand power tools to create some of the similar parts that you would create otherwise.
And I know there's been infamous memes about the Tesla in your background of your videos. But uh how do you guys fundraise? What's your plan for fundraising? How does that work out for you? Is it a lot based on team dues and just generally whatever people are able to pitch in? Do you guys fundraise from companies and sponsors? How does that work out for you guys?
Yeah, so actually last season we were really, really fortunate to get a sponsorship from Apple, but this season we were not able to get that, unfortunately. So this year we just had like each member pitch in as much as they could. I think usually it was like around 200 to 300 bucks. Um, Depending on like, like each member's like availability and financial situation. So that was probably enough to, since we had a lot of parts existing before and all the electronics and stuff, it was enough to like build a couple iterations of our robot, and I think it's still keeping us going.
Yeah. So do you think that's for those who may not be able to get those easy $200, $300 from team members, so those who probably can't find that money, do you think finding sponsorships is a good way to go about it? Or do you think they only need a certain amount of money and they can just work off it like you guys do so successfully?
Yeah, I think definitely finding sponsorships is the way to go, and I would say start looking early so that um come time that the season kickoff like rolls around, you have like some money that you spend on raw materials, other maybe tools, specialized parts that you might need for the season, and that should keep you going for pretty much the entire season.
Yeah, and then I'd like chime in as well with that. We look for a lot of sponsorships before the season. We try and manage most of our money before the season so that we're just able to work in season and not have to worry about costs. Like we're able to drop $100 on belts like we did the other day. But so we looked for a lot of sponsorships. I definitely recommend doing that. Reaching out to companies that have specific stuff for your needs is super helpful. At least that we've found, and I'm sure you guys can vouch for that as well. But like
Hmm.
companies like Granger, companies like Sen, companies like Mizumi that make parts that you can actually use, companies like GoBuild and Rev obviously, who make parts that you actually are going to use in your day-to-day experience instead of just maybe looking at the bigger tech companies like Apple and Microsoft and Google who won't offer as much for you. So I definitely recommend that, and I'm sure Mukund can echo my sentiments there.
Yeah, definitely. Like especially if you come up with maybe like a local company, like a local machine shop or something. They not only can help you with, materials, machining, stuff like that, they also have the expertise, right? So they can like help you kind of learn more about manufacturing processes, which is really, really important and just like really good to know in the long run. So I guess when you're looking for sponsorships, keep an open mind. It's not always, I mean, money is definitely like the primary factor for looking for sponsorships, but also like finding a company with maybe a couple employees that can mentor your team is also very, very helpful.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that's all I have for my end. Do you have any other tips you want to share about what you guys do, how you're so successful year on year?
I think that's about it. Uh, just like keep getting better at these like hand working methods and like figure it out. You'll be on a good track soon enough.
Yeah, all right. Thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions, you can find both of us as moderators on the FTC Discord or in a million other places on Discord. And we're both very active. And then any other questions you can direct to FTC Files. Once again, thank you guys for watching. Have a great day.